Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating Cambridge assessment paper that honestly made us completely rethink a fundamental pillar of our education system. We're talking about how we report exam outcomes. We're going to explore why the traditional grading systems we've all just kind of accepted might actually be fundamentally flawed, and why a massive shift to a numerical scale might be exactly the upgrade our educational framework needs right now. Let's dive in. So think about it for a second. Is a letter grade really a fair measure of what you know? Almost all of us grew up with that traditional A star to G grading system, right? You get a B, maybe your friend gets a C, and boom, that letter suddenly defines your entire academic identity for that subject. But have you ever actually stopped to ask if that letter is a fair, mathematically sound representation of your capability? Well, the research we're looking at today suggests it's really not. Here is the crucial point to keep in mind. Grades are actually just arbitrary categories imposed on an underlying continuum of achievement. Think about human learning for a minute. It's not a set of distinct, rigidly separated boxes. It is a smooth, continuous line of progress. But a letter grade forces that smooth line into rigid, man-made buckets. It summarizes your ability to such an extreme degree that it literally masks your true continuous capability. To put that into perspective, take a look at what happens with these three fictional students, Alf, Kim, and Jay. Alf and Kim have incredibly close raw scores. Literally, they might just be a single mark apart. But because of where the boundary falls, Alf gets a D and Kim gets a C. One single mark changes their entire grade outcome. Now, on the flip side, look at Kim and Jay. Jay scored significantly higher on the actual raw marks than Kim did, yet they both end up trapped in the exact same C grade buckets. The current system is giving us a totally distorted reflection of reality. But if we plot those exact same three students on a numerical scale, the true picture finally emerges. Alf and Kim are scored closely together, exactly as they mathematically should be, and Jay is appropriately rewarded for pulling far ahead of Kim. The actual physical distance between their raw marks is beautifully and accurately preserved on that vertical axis. When you put these two side by side, the contrast is just stark. The old system is basically an unfair staircase, where missing a step by a millimeter drops you down an entire level. The scale score, on the other hand, is a smooth, accurate diagonal line. It perfectly aligns your effort and knowledge with the resulting outcome. Honestly, seeing it like this makes you wonder why we ever accepted the staircase in the first place, doesn't it? Okay, so if we actually switch to this new system, what would it look like? Well, Cambridge Assessment suggests using a range like 600 to 900. Now, you might be wondering why those random numbers? Why not just do a simple 1 to 100? It's actually highly deliberate. Using 600 to 900 guarantees that a student's final score will never accidentally be confused with a basic percentage of the raw marks they gained. It sends a clear signal that this is a specialized, standardized metric. So, by definition, a scale score is a fine-grained numerical reporting scale that takes those aggregate raw scores and smoothly transforms them to accurately represent that underlying continuum of achievement. The absolute magic word there is smoothly. Because it's fine-grained, we completely eliminate those sudden, jarring jumps in value that happen when a student gets just one extra raw mark and crosses a letter grade boundary. Breaking it all down, the key advantages here are pretty undeniable. First up, it preserves student rank order, so you know exactly where you stand. Second, it completely avoids those unfair grade boundary jumps we just saw with Alf and Kim. Third, it takes unavoidable measurement error because, let's face it, no exam is perfect, and distributes it evenly across the whole scale, rather than dangerously concentrating it right at the boundary lines. And finally, it's future-proof. If overall student achievement keeps rising over the decades, we don't have to invent silly new grades. We completely avoid the creeping absurdity of having to create an A double star or an A triple star, making our exam grades sound like hotel ratings. Section 1, addressing the complexities. How would a transition to scale scores actually work? Now, changing an entire national grading system naturally brings up some practical questions. The immediate pushback from parents and students is almost always, look, I know exactly what a B means. I have no instinctive idea what a 750 means. How on earth do we interpret these numbers if we've completely lost our traditional alphabetical anchor? Well, the researchers propose a really smart dual approach to give these numbers deep meaning. The first part is criterion referenced meaning. This means an exam board could specifically say a student with a score of 750 can successfully answer certain complex puzzle pieces of the curriculum. The second part is cohort referenced meaning. This provides context clearly showing where you stand in the crowd, like saying a score of 750 places a student in the top 15% of all test takers this year. Between these two methods, a 750 actually ends up providing way more detailed insight than a simple letter B ever could. Then, of course, there's the incredibly tricky puzzle of tiering. Currently, in some subjects, students take either a foundation or a higher tier paper, and those different papers have overlapping grades, like a C. If we switch to this massive number scale, how do you fairly handle those overlapping middle scores when the students took entirely different exam papers? The reality is, trying to perfectly map easy and hard papers together creates a tangled mess of what researchers call vertical scaling. It's essentially trying to perfectly align two completely different rulers. The more elegant solution, a move to scale scores might naturally push us towards single route tiering. Having everyone aim for a clear target without overlapping ranges actually gives us undeniable, much more secure proof of what an examinee truly knows. Next up is standard maintenance. This is a big one. If a student takes an exam in London under one exam board and a student in Manchester takes it under another, how do universities know a 750 means the exact same thing across the board? The research is crystal clear on this. It absolutely requires a strong regulator to step in. They would have to ensure every single exam board uses the exact same mathematical reporting scales. It's really the only way to support ironclad claims of comparability across the entire system. And now for the inevitable question that every teacher and university admissions officer is going to ask. Can we just mathematically translate the new numbers back into the old familiar letter grades? Can we just say a 750 is exactly a B+? The researchers argue strongly against doing that. We really need to cut the chain entirely and make a clean break. Instead of clumsily trying to map these new sophisticated gears to an old rusty system, we should design assessments that are entirely tailored for these new scales from the ground up. Because exam syllabuses and structures are constantly being reformed anyway, we should rely only on broad comparable outcomes to monitor national performance year over year, rather than trying to force a one-to-one translation. Section 2. The future of accountability. Shifting the focus of our education system. Now, this right here is arguably the most powerful consequence highlighted in the entire paper. For decades, schools have been judged by the percentage of students achieving a grade C or above. And what does that do? It forces schools to disproportionately focus their resources, their time, and their tutoring on the borderline students who are just sitting below that C boundary. And tragically, this often happens at the expense of students who are securely failing or securely passing. By eliminating the C boundary entirely, scale scores would force schools to care equally about the continuous improvement of every single student, no matter where they currently sit on the scale. It is a real game changer. Which brings us to our final thought for today. If we actually abandon these arbitrary buckets and instead embrace a system that accurately measures and values every single incremental step a student takes on their educational journey, what else could we unlock? If every single mark truly matters, could we cultivate a fairer, more nuanced, and ultimately more motivating culture of education for absolutely everyone? It's a completely fascinating question, and one that scale scores might just help us answer. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. I'll see you in the next explainer.